All right. Well, hi everybody and welcome. My name is Jyotsna Pandey and I serve as the Executive Director for the Natural Science Collections Alliance, as well as Community Programs Director for the American Institute of Biological Sciences. Thank you for joining this meeting of the NSC Alliance to learn more about the organization, what we do and who's part of it, and to participate in a strategic discussion to help shape our future priority areas. Um, Before we start, just some brief housekeeping. So this program is being recorded, at least part of it. There's going to be a breakout session which we won't be able to record, but we'll post the recorded part or share it after the meeting. You may use the chat feature to, oh, is the breakout?
Sorry, that was me. Sorry, I was trying to open them. Ignore it. Sorry, I closed it. Sorry.
Okay. The chat is open, so feel free to introduce yourself using the chat. And also feel free to use the chat for comments and questions and all that. And if you would like to speak, which we're hoping that people would feel free to, please use the raise hand function during the meeting. Diane, who you just heard, is serving as the IT support for this meeting. So if you have any technical difficulties, just please feel free to chat Diane. And then we'll start with a brief presentation here about NSCA, just provide an overview, what we've been up to recently. And then we'll get into a breakout session about future focus areas. And after the breakout, we'll have some time to sort of get into some discussion as well. So to start us off with some background information, I'm going to hand it off to our new NSCA President, Trina Roberts, who's the Associate VP for Collections at the Natural History Museum of LA County. Trina,
Thanks,
take it
Jyotsna.
away.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out to help us plan the next year and phase for this organization. NSC Alliance is a 501c3 nonprofit based in the DC metro area. We support natural science collections, their people, their institutions, and their activities that support science and society. We try to connect institutions across the US, and that includes not just museums, but also institutions like botanic gardens, herbaria, universities, any institution that houses natural science collections, uses them in research, and supports that community. We also have affiliate members, including professional societies that are engaged in similar parts of the mission of collections and research. You go to the next slide. The group is led by a board of directors, which we're showing here. You'll meet some of these people either through the presentations today or in the breakout sessions. You'll hear from our VP, Brita Zimkis, Secretary Barb Thiers, and past President Gil Nelson. You'll also see, I think, Jordan, Emily, and Kathy, at least, and Peter facilitating discussion sessions. And a couple other board members will be participating in those. We are always looking for new perspectives. We are looking to represent the entire collections community. So we do welcome nominations from any member organization who's not currently represented on the board, or if you feel that an organization like yours is not represented on the board. We welcome nominations when we open that process in the fall. That is also a great way to help drive the NSCA agenda, as well as attending meetings like this. You can go to the next slide. All right, so from the past, since 2024, we have had 35 member institutions represented in the NSCA. Over 60% of those are college and university members, so collections or museums or other kinds of organizations embedded in or associated with a college or university. We also have 16 affiliate society members in there. I haven't shown those on the map because something like the Ornithological Society doesn't have a location in the same way that a collecting organization does, but we appreciate those as well. These, again, are museums, collections, botanic gardens, research institute, any kind of organization that has collections. What I want to point out to you is that while we want to be representing the entire collections community, there are more than 1,000 US institutions in the Global Registry of Scientific Collections. We do not have 1,000 members. If you feel like we are not representing your region, your style of institution, or your type of collection, it may be because no such institution has joined NSCA, and we don't have a window into the issues and priorities that you are worrying about. So please, take a look at this map. Think about the regions that are not represented and the kinds of institutions that are and are not represented. And you can help us fill these gaps if you feel like this is an important way to make sure your priorities are on our radar. So I'm going to pass it back to Jyotsna to talk a little bit about NSCA's work and recent initiatives.
Yeah, thanks, Trina. So the mission of the Alliance is really to act as an advocate for natural science collections institutions by promoting the importance of collections in science, education, public service, and by providing a forum to consider common issues of interest of our membership, as well as encouraging collaboration towards the development and implementation of mutual priorities. So our work really ranges from advocacy before Congress, the White House, federal agencies, to empowering the community to advocate for themselves and for collections at the federal and state levels, providing educational programs, supporting at-risk collections, and helping to build the future of open, connected biodiversity resources with initiatives like the Digital Data Conference, on which NSCA is a partner, the Biodiversity Collections Network initiative that has championed the Extended Specimen Network, as well as the more recent Biological Collections Action Center initiative. We'll be expanding on several of these shortly. So in this next session, we're just going to talk about or highlight a few recent activities that NSCA has been engaged in. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about our public policy and advocacy efforts. So advocacy, as I mentioned earlier, is a big part of what we do. And I want to emphasize here that NSCA is a 501c3 organization, and so it's nonpartisan. This is a question we get a lot, so I want to emphasize that, this 501c3 status essentially prohibits any partisan political activity, endorsing specific candidates or parties or things like that. But it does allow issue-based advocacy, including, providing expert input to policymakers, issuing policy statements, offering recommendations, testifying before Congress, and engaging in public education on science-related issues. So, and I also want to note that, collections have enjoyed bipartisan support over the years. For example, language supporting collections and investments in collections was in the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act that was passed in 2022. As well as, more recently, we've seen continued support for the Institute for Museum and Library Services, for example, in Congress. So we want to keep it that way. We want to have bipartisan support, and NSCA works to keep it that way. So with that, some recent ways in which we have advocated for collections are on this slide. So, one of the ways that we weigh in every year is by providing congressional testimony in support of robust federal funding for the National Science Foundation, for IMLS, programs that curate collections within the Department of Interior, as well as the Smithsonian Institution. And then related to this, we're also members of the Coalition for National Science Funding, or CNSF, which is an alliance of more than 140 scientific organizations that advocate for NSF funding. And through this coalition, we coordinate with other organizations across the country that really care about NSF to advocate for robust funding for it on a regular basis through things like letters, statements, meetings with lawmakers, and so forth. And then last year, when the administration had targeted the IMLS for elimination via executive order, NSCA had led 74 organizations in sending a letter to Congress expressing deep concerns and urging lawmakers to ensure that IMLS remains functional and funded. And we also established a letter writing campaign to enable the natural history collections community to write to Congress about protecting IMLS from harmful cuts. So, this kind of campaign generated more than 500 letters that were sent to lawmakers from all 50 states. And as we now know, our advocacy efforts were successful, with IMLS ending up with a small 1% cut to its budget rather than being completely defunded. And then a few more examples of how we've engaged in advocacy. NSCA recently provided comments to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, in response to a request for information from them. And our comments essentially called for recognizing collections as critical research infrastructure for accelerating the American scientific enterprise. So that was pretty recent. Last December is when we submitted those comments, and also with the uh, administration looking to eliminate the USGS ecosystems mission area, which is the biological research arm for the agency. We joined with the Ecological Society of America and 70 other organizations in writing to the Interior Secretary, as well as Congress, to express full support for the mission area and to call for sustained funding for it in 2026, which again, Congress has supported and has provided a little over a 1% cut relative, compared to, or rather than eliminating it completely as the administration had asked for. So those were some examples. And for a recent international example, we joined Spinach in providing comments on a draft position statement from the IUCN and Species Survival Commission on the vital role of natural history collections in biodiversity monitoring. So there are a range of letters and comments that are featured here, but this is not the full list. I encourage you to check out our website to see all of the letters and statements that we put out on a regular basis. And then finally, I just wanted to mention that we also co-sponsored the Biological Sciences Congressional District Visits event that's organized by AIBS every summer and fall, which really enables scientists, curators, museum professionals, students to meet with their federal or state elected officials in their home state to inform policy. And participants have the option to meet with their lawmakers either in their district office or invite them out for a tour, which is a great way to showcase the different ways collections serve as critical research and education infrastructure. And we also enable some coordinated active advocacy by developing and providing specific talking points for collections to use in their meetings and tours. And many NSCA members have participated in this effort over the years, and it continues to be a good way to build relationships with lawmakers. So yeah, with that advocacy piece, I'm now going to pass it on to NSCA Vice President Brita Zimkes, who's the Director of Collections Operations at the Harvard MCZ, for this next section.
Thanks, Jyotsna. So one of the things that NSCA likes to do is identify topics that are people want more information about, education, more discussion about, and repatriation was identified by us as one of those topics. Members of the NSCA Alliance, as well as the Society for the Preservation of Natural History Collections and AIBS, began meeting informally to talk about NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, and how recent changes in the guidelines in the legislation would be implemented in our collections. We found that there was really no targeted advice for non-anthropological disciplines, and there were very few examples of successful repatriations involving zoological, botanical, paleontological, and geological collections. So we ended up deciding to organize first one webinar, and then we added a second later in 2024 and 2025. We identified speakers that could help provide context and information about NAGPRA and then just repatriation beyond NAGPRA. And we wanted to make sure that there was time for discussion so people could ask their questions. So both of those webinars had Q&As. Next slide, please. So our first webinar was in November 2024 and focused on the scope of NAGPRA and how it relates to natural history collections. We were joined by the National NAGPRA Program Manager, who discussed the recent updates to the NAGPRA regulations and how to facilitate respectful return of items. We also had two members from Bernstein and Associates NAGPRA consultants who talked through various examples of repatriation involving non-anthropological collections. This program was really well attended. We had over 500 registrants with over 300 people joining live, and thus far over 500 views of the recording. Next slide, please. So we decided to add a second webinar after we realized that NAGPRA only is a part of this story. So our second webinar focused on repatriation beyond NAGPRA. This program included a wide array of speakers who shared their experiences with voluntary repatriation, and examples included both zoological and botanical case studies. This program had even more registrants, with 600 people being registered, and we had about the same number of people attending, just over 300. And so far, this program has had 200 views of the recording. So given the interest in these two webinars, it was obvious that those in our community are looking for guidance on this topic, and we're actually scheduled to meet tomorrow to discuss ideas for future programs. Thank you. And I think I'm passing it on to Gil Nelson next.
Thank you very much, Brita. Yeah, okay. Make sure I wasn't muted. So I'm Gil Nelson. I am the immediate past president of NSCA and also the director of IDIG Bio at the Florida Museum, the University of Florida. One of NSCA's goals over the past several years has been to advocate for an action center for biological collections. That was referenced in the CHIPS and Science Act, and we want to keep that and still want to keep that concept active and the community involved around it because we think it's very important. As you may know, or you may remember, the concept of a center focused on sustaining biological collections was first floated by the Biological Collections Network, which is a group under NSCA and AIBS and RCN. And they floated the idea of the need for a central organizing unit for supporting collections. And so we feel like, and so at the same time, the NSF also funded an ad hoc committee. Some of the folks in this room were on that committee. And this ad hoc committee was through the National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And it produced a report entitled Biological Collections, Ensuring Critical Research and Education for the 21st Century. Next slide, please. Thanks. So sort of this report was sort of a refinement of Beacon's central organizing unit. And it was included in the NASEM report, if you can get a copy of that, as 8-1, as recommendation 8-1, which was later codified into public law with the statement, and the statement is outlined in yellow at the bottom right side of your screen. So that statement basically says that the NSF, I can't find it on my notes here, but the NSF shall make awards to facilitate coordination and data sharing among communities of practice for research, education, workforce training, evaluation, and business model development, including by establishing an action center for biological collections. The idea of the action center generated considerable interest in the collections community for sure, and NSCA and its partners have provided leadership in advocacy for the center and trying to establish a center. Unfortunately, NSF considered this action center an unfunded mandate, and there was no appropriation for an action center accompanying the bill. Nevertheless, NSCA partnered with IDIG Bio and many others in the collections community to conduct a series of well-attended webinars in March of 2023, followed by some really great workshops held first at the New York Botanical Garden, then the Field Museum, and then the LA County Museum of Natural History in LA. And we had a really good turnout. Between the webinars and the workshops, we had over 300 collections professionals involved in these. We gathered lots and lots of information. We heard lots and lots of ideas. It was a very exciting time, and we were really hoping that this might lead to some funding. We had NSF staff at least two of the workshops, but I think we didn't have the people that could allocate the money, or that the obligation of the, I guess, of the NSF at that point was it was still an unfunded mandate, and they didn't have the funds to make it happen. So, I mean, I can understand that. I would like to point out that at NYBG, at the William and Linda Steer Herbarium, Emily Sessa was very involved in this and helped us organize the event in New York. John Bates was very involved. He's also a former president of NSCA, and he was very involved in at the Field Museum and getting a workshop together there. And LA County Museum, NSCA's current president, Trina Roberts, was also involved in that. So we had a great community effort to pull this off, and when we were excited about it. So next slide, or is that the last slide? Yeah, okay. So the webinars and the workshops and the resulting community collaborations and consultations we had, which included the 300 professionals I mentioned, resulted in a white paper, which was entitled Envisioning a Natural History Collections Action Center. And it was published in spring of 2024 and distributed through NSCA and IDIG-Bio websites, as well as a number of collections listservs. I will say that we call that Envisioning a Natural History Collections Action Center because we think our community is much larger than a biological collections group. Obviously, we have geo and paleo and all conservation, ecology. All those folks are involved in our group in one way or another. So we wanted to not limit that because of the idea of a just extended specimen, digital extended specimen concept that would involve data and information from all of those fields. So it was our purpose to name this a natural science collections rather than just a biological collections. So the report by did I mention the white paper? Report by this whole group was turned into a white paper that was distributed widely to a lot of different venues. And that white paper was then refined a little bit thanks to Brita Zimkus being able to take very complicated things and make them simpler. We appreciated that very much. And then beyond that, Libby Elwood, who has been very involved in this effort since the beginning, essentially put together with a group of co-authors a paper for bioscience, which should be published in the next month or so. So I hope you guys will all be looking for that paper and read it when it comes out. It's called Action. It's called From Knowledge to Action, Next Steps for the Natural Science Collections Community. And it really outlines a little more clearly, a little more precisely what this biological collections action center should look like. The IDIG-Bio PIs met with NSCF about this, and it seemed to be they were a little confused about what the action center would do. So we've worked hard to try to narrow that down a little bit, and we think that has to be done, and it has to be done by our community. It needs to be more of a business plan than it is just a statement of the stuff we like. And so that I think is underway and may germinate from this paper that Libby and her team has worked on. So that'll be coming out shortly. I hope you'll all look for it. I think our message today probably is that we should all keep pursuing this idea on behalf of collections. I think we all have a sense of what it means, and we should produce a stronger, more precise definition and business model, as was stated in the CHIPS and Science Act, for the organization of this operation, what its structure and objectives should look like. So be aware that you'll probably be called on to help contribute to some of this. Okay. I think that's all I have, Joyce.
Yeah, thanks, Gil. I think Barbara Tears is next.
Yep, Barbara's next.
Hi, I'm Barbara Tears. I'm the Director Emeritus of the New York Botanical Garden Herbarium and currently a research associate at the Denver Botanic Garden. So threatened and orphaned collections are sometimes headlines in our community and sometimes are on the back burner. But we at NSCA try to stay abreast of things that we hear about and follow up on so that we can try to contribute to a positive outcome for whatever the situation is. I'm sure many people know in February of 2024, it was announced that Duke Herbarium was going to be given away. And we responded in several ways, signing letters, that others were writing, as well as writing our own viewpoint in bioscience about the need to, well, the title says it all, really. Situation's still unresolved, but anyway, we did what we could. More recently, we provided comments to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which requested such comments about their decision to close the Bark West facility of the USDA in Beltsville, Maryland, and to relocate its functions, two of which are important to this community, the massive U.S. National Fungus Collection and also the USDA nematode collection. So the focus of our letter was not so much asking them not to close the facility, but more that they recognize that wherever, if they do move the facility, wherever they move it to, it's critical that the collections have the same accessibility to the scientific community that they do now, that the collections are properly housed in terms of their climate conditions, and also that a staff is maintained to provide the same service to these invaluable collections as they were receiving or they are receiving now in their current home in Beltsville. As far as we know, that matter is still unresolved. Most recently, there was an article in The Guardian about the headline that caught our attention. It was about a collection of basically a collection of living fungi that serve ecological research. The collection is maintained in an agriculture department at the University of Kansas and was under funding stress, does not have a secure funding stream when their current NSF grant runs out. What we did here was mostly just connect the people in charge of this collection with the very impressive suite of people who know a lot about maintaining collections at their same institution in the Biodiversity Institute. Neither group was very much aware of one another, but now they are talking, and hopefully whatever dire consequences might have been worried about for this living collection of fungi can be mitigated. Finally, so our response in this area is by necessity ad hoc. You don't really know when these things are going to come up. And so it's hard to have any kind of organized plan for how to address them. We will say, though, if members or even not anybody is worried about their own collection or knows of a collection in trouble, we will try to help. We will try to be as confidential as we can. If you contact us, anyone on the board, about your concerns about your collection closing, we will try to find a way to help you one-on-one, either through our own knowledge or if it's something we don't know about, by connecting you with someone in the community who we think can help you. So that's an open offer for the future. And I think now it's back to Jyotsna.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. Just one last thing I wanted to point to the community is this resource that is available to everybody. We publish a monthly newsletter called Washington Report that you can subscribe to for free using the QR code there. So we try to highlight things like the latest policy news and developments, including what's going on with science funding, agency reorganizations, and other developments that impact collections. We also highlight any advocacy alerts, if there are opportunities to take action on, as well as any opportunities to provide comments. For example, federal register notices pertaining to collections in simplified language, or opportunities to nominate experts to advisory or expert panels. We also include updates on any actions that NSCA has recently taken. And in recent years, we've also been highlighting things like job openings and collections. So if you have any openings and you want to advertise it, do send those to me. That would be great. And we also try to highlight any programs, any webinars, workshops, and things like that might be of interest to the community. Not just those from NSCA, but any sort of broader programs that might be of interest. So with that, we're at the end of the presentation portion of this meeting. We hope this provided some useful context, a helpful summary of what NSCA is and does. And we're going to move on to breakouts. So at this point, we want to hear from you about potential future focus areas for the Alliance, and any needs in the community that we can help to address. We'll be breaking out into 5 groups, and each group will be facilitated by 1 or 2 board members, and we'll work on a shared Google Doc, which has 5 tabs for the 5 groups. And anyone can edit this document, so you feel free to add your thoughts into it as the discussions progress. And each tab has the same 3 questions for each group to consider. And these questions are on the screen here. What are some issues that are not possible to resolve at the institutional level, but could be addressed by an organization like the NSC Alliance? What issues does your institution know you need to solve, but don't know where to start? Things like NAGPRA or insurance. What do you want to know more about that can inform our future educational programming is also a useful question to consider. So these are the questions we'll be discussing, and we'll be breaking out the groups in a few seconds. Thank you all. Diane, go ahead.
Yep, I invited everybody to their group.
Great, thank you. I think everybody should have a prompt on your screens to join a breakout group. So please go ahead and join.
I think oh, no, we're still waiting for
2 people are still here.
Make sure. Yeah, you're the only one unassigned. There we go. Okay, so they're all in there.
I'm not sharing my screen, right?
No, you're not.
It's hard to tell. Hey, everybody, welcome back. Hopefully you all at least had a few minutes to share your thoughts. It was a short breakout group, but I'm hoping some interesting ideas came out of that discussion. So for this next piece here, the goal is for each group to provide a little bit of a summary of what was discussed. And we're going to start with group 1. I can't remember who the lead facilitator was for that group, but was that
That was Jordan.
Jordan?
Hi. So some things that came up were a couple of people in the room had received requests from federal agencies or from national parks asking for lists of specimens and asking for guidance about are there resources for that, because often it could be quite labor intensive. So that was something we talked about a little bit. Another thing that we talked about is there were issues in staffing changes at different federal agencies, depending on the state of things in DC, that really affected turnaround times and permits. And it would be, great to have guidance on if there are resources to reach out to, or advanced warning of, things like CITES permits or permit renewals that normally have a certain time frame, but get very drawn out when you reduce the staff size of that department. Various kinds of repatriations, as well as thinking about a changing narrative around collections from other countries. So similarly, how we are considered stewards of these collections that came from federal lands that were declared as federal property retroactively for those national parks. Maybe a similar kind of attitude and approach and language around stewards of collections from other countries and developing guidelines for MOUs, for ways we communicate about those things. And I think that's the summary.
That's great. Thanks, Jordan. And that's the last point there might be helpful for the NAGPRA planning team to consider as we think about new programs. All right. Group 2. I think that was Peter.
That was me.
Yes, Peter.
Yeah. Let's see here. We talked about sustainability around the digital extended specimen and network, which requires, physical infrastructure. We're a large part doing this kind of, separately. We'd love to see it kind of come together and be collaborative, more cooperative. Questions about digitization and storage costs related to that. It's not cheap to store these digitized images and all the metadata. Ultimately, an action center obviously could help with some of those issues. We talked about the challenge of funding. We talked about education, and especially in terms of educating some of our administrations, about the importance of our collections, those, how to communicate effectively and impactfully about the importance of scientific collections. We talked about advocacy, attribution, and lastly, diversifying funding sources. That is, working with our development or advancement groups and seeing how there can be different ways. There could be a palette or a menu of options for donors. Say, in contrast to going after one thing and then potentially missing donors that you otherwise might have gotten to, even though they're not, they might not pay top dollar or don't donate top dollar. They might donate at a lower level, but it might be something that they're interested in. So that's the things we talked about.
Thanks, Peter. A lot of good information there. Group 3, I think that was Emily.
Yeah, it was me, and Barbara, I think, took notes. Thank you very much. I'm happy to do the summarizing, Barbara, unless you want to. Okay, I'll go ahead. Yeah, so some, not surprisingly, some overlap with the previous two groups, but a few new things as well. So for the first question, federal permits and regulations also came up for us. So inconsistency in interpretation, different regions doing things differently. We also talked about advocating for the needs of collections in the current environment, that's maybe something that could, transcend our institutions. And also funding availability that came up for us there. So sort of broader understanding of the funding needs of institutions. And then for the second question, the issues your institution knows you need to solve. Insurance, definitely for us in our group. We had a problem unique to a mycological collection where students and volunteers potentially are allergic to spores in the air potentially. And how do you mitigate that if you don't have the funds available to purchase a big air handler? We also talked about aligning standards and digitization efforts in the aftermath of iDigBio. So lots of new tools and methods are coming online. How are we going to make sure we're all sort of, have equal access to information about that? Collections training, sort of similar vein, we talked about how that could be better aligned across collections. And then for the future educational part, we also talked about funding here, specifically how can we come up with narratives about collections and their importance that don't tie to the fact that that reflect the fact that collections don't necessarily make as much money, for example, as like a microbiology lab. So how do we justify ourselves when we're not revenue generating, or at least not as much as other areas might be? And then there's a great idea that the NSCA could report back on the congressional district visits. So like what was communicated, how was it received, what feedback is needed to sort of disseminate that information. And yeah, just how to talk to administrators. That's it for us.
Great. Thanks, Emily. And then group 4 was, let's see, Kathy.
Do you say group 4? Is
Yes.
that next? Okay. Let's see. So a lot of the same themes popped up. So we talked about trying to tackle challenges for sources of funding for collections. Kind of in general, there were folks in our group that were new to what NSCA does and really just wanted to come here to learn more about the organization and connecting the idea of like what are the everyday needs that museums are struggling with, and then connecting that to opportunities that can be resolved through like direct advocacy. And specific topics that came up for greater need for greater awareness and sharing resources include biosecurity and biosafety, and also insurance, kind of how that works. And let's see, we talked about ways that we can work together as a community, especially ways to support small and regional museums that might not be close to like a state capital or closer to a large organization, but still struggling with some of the same problems. And additional outreach and support for repatriation as it applies to non-anthropological collections, and building on the work that the Alliance has done in the past.
That's great. Thanks, Kathy. And I think Trina, you're the last group.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Group 5, for an active discussion. We had a really nice combination of different kinds and sizes and structures of institutions represented. There was some discussion of the fact that everyone is short of money and staff and time and space, the usual issues. And yeah, so that's, I think, all of our starting point at this point. So we talked a little bit about what we can do about that and how an organization can help individual organizations overcome challenges given that. We talked about the need for support for internal advocacy, as well as the kinds of advocacy that this organization is doing already at the, say, the national or the state level, that we could be helping, providing some resources that would help individual collections advocate within their institutions, that maybe is a need that everybody has and that is difficult to attack individually. We could provide some talking points or some success stories or peer, connect administrators with their peers, lots of different ways where we might be able to help people make the case to their own institutions for why collections are important and why their staff are important and why the things that they are saying are needs are not just like to be ignored. We talked a little bit about the NSF. NSF had been pushing for a while specimen management plans and pushing for new ways of making sure that specimens collected in NSF grants are deposited in real collecting repositories long term, but that the question of how that's funded was never really addressed, and that there's a lot of institutions worried about what that means, how you might do something like set a price for depositing specimens. That is an institutional decision. There are a lot of institutional factors, and yet it might be useful to have some more community discussion and resources that would help structure that would provide some guidelines or some, guardrails, so that we're not all doing this in a completely different way, but still respecting the differences between, regions and sizes and styles of institutions. Everybody, there seems to be a lot of worry about how that's going to work and how it even, whether we don't like charging for specimens and for access to collections and the true cost of keeping a specimen forever is really quite high if we charge that back to the depositing researcher. We talked about just public relations, like how do we pool our resources so that we can make the case for collections to our communities, whether that's because you're a big collecting institution or small institution where what you're known in your local community for is exhibits, but your collections are important nationally. How do you make that case? How do we create some shared resources that maybe everybody can use? And there again, like maybe you don't have a graphic designer, but you could use something that has been created for you that you can then hand out, stickers at an event or something that talk about, or fact sheets that talk about collections. Some shared resources might be helpful. And then some discussion of whether there's a way to have collections certified, so certification or accreditation for collections that's separate from like AAM accredits museums or ASLH accredits museums, I don't know. But that there's nothing that's collection specific that says to your administrators, this is a real endeavor, these are professionals, resources are needed, there are best practices. And whether that's something that this community could take on somehow. And a little bit of a discussion at the end about the Action Center and whether it would be helpful to envision that as in part as a distributed model with regional or state action and not just a single national unit, especially since it seems like at the moment it's unfunded. So the original model that was discussed maybe isn't happening right now anyway. So that was group 5. Thanks.
Thank you, Trina, and thank you, everybody else. I mean, this was an impressive list of ideas, lots of them. I will say that there are a couple of those ideas that, or at least half of those ideas we've also discussed as part of board meetings and things like that. So I think it's an ongoing discussion for sure. A couple of those ideas I know that people in the community are working on. So the resources for advocacy, for example, that's something that Beacon's been thinking about. So keep an eye out for those. We're certainly, it has come up in a lot of discussions about the need for advocacy resources for both internal and external advocacy. NSCA does provide some talking points, as I mentioned earlier, for things like the district visits, but there's room for additional resources for sure, and that's something we'll keep an eye on. And the other ideas, the thoughts about insurance, permitting, I think those are ideas that have percolated for a while. The specimen management plan discussion, I mean, there's clearly a need for a lot of resources or additional resources on that. And Beacon has worked on that issue for a bit, and we had to take a little bit of a break because we had an NSC grant with the Biofair Data Network. But I think that it might be worth considering additional kind of resources along those lines. But again, with the caveat that we don't really have funding to pursue any of those activities. So I think the funding remains the kind of biggest point to address. But again, I know we're at the end of our time here. I wish we had more time. And this was a great discussion. There's a lot of good ideas that were shared, but I will just leave you all with just one final thing that, we will consider all of these ideas, see what might be feasible for NSCA to take on. We might have to do some prioritization, but we'll consider all the input received today. We'll come up with a plan, and we'll also be sharing potentially a follow-up survey to get some additional input from you all if we think we need that. But we do hope that you'll stay engaged. Hopefully this provided a good overview of what NSCA is. I know we've heard from some people that they're not familiar with NSCA, so I hope this was a useful introduction. But please do visit our website to learn more, and feel free to contact us at that general email, membership@nscalliance.org, with any ideas or any questions that you might have, or if you're interested in joining NSCA. And yeah, do follow us on social media. We have a presence on LinkedIn and Blue Sky, so I encourage you to follow us. Thank you all for joining.